And now, on today's episode, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be bringing on two great minds in the field of FP&A. And the reason why we're doing this is because a lot of people ask the question of, how do I go from accounting into FP&A? You know, is going from accounting to FP&A the right move for me and my career? You know, is it a great opportunity? Now, I can tell you all of my personal opinions about it. But one of the things that I also wanted to do was to give you a chance to hear from two others that are working in FP&A. One, he started his career in accounting and then he moved into FP&A. And another, he started his career in FP&A and he's just continued into FP&A. And they're going to give you their perspective on that question. But before we jump into that and they give you their perspective on that question, I wanted to pose a few of my own thoughts and to pose a few questions. The first question I would ask is, if someone is trying to figure out, should I go from accounting and should I move into FP&A? The big question that you should ask yourself before you make any career or any business decision, or even if, let's say, you're an accounting firm and you're trying to figure out, hey, how do we take some of the things that FP&A does and how do we build it into some of our services and our offerings? The big question that I think you should always take a step back and ask yourself is, why would I be interested in doing this? Like, why would I be interested in making this change? Why would I be interested in making this adjustment? I mean, if you start with that question of really understanding your why. Now, I will tell you, you do want to be completely honest with yourself about it. Now, you may not be as bluntly honest with other people about it, and you may not necessarily want to openly say it in an interview or something like that. But if you are trying to think about this yourself, you do want to be honest with yourself, because I've told some people that, one aspect of moving from accounting into FP&A is that a lot of times the next CFO or the next senior leaders, a lot of times they come from an FP&A background. And if you want to move up in your career really fast, FP&A could be a great option for you to move up in your career. So you want to be honest. If that is your reason, there's nothing wrong with that being your reason, but you do want to make sure that you are honest with yourself about it so that you can make the best decision for you. Now, the next thing I would also ask is, how fast do you want to make this move? Because see, the thing about it is sometimes getting into FP&A, it really does come down to an opportunity of, availability of the positions. Are the positions available? Because sometimes the position just may not be there for you. And sometimes that position isn't available right away. So you may have to plan a little bit ahead, or you may have to look out a little bit and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have a little different timeline before I jump into this. So you want to make sure you kind of understand, what is your timing going to be on this? And that will also help you in your time of navigating that decision. And then I do think a very, very important one is, have you actually talked to people who have done the FP&A job? See, this one is a big one that a lot of people overlook because they look at it from their outside perspective and they say all the good things, but they don't actually talk to someone who is in FP&A to understand, hey, what is it really like to be in FP&A? And that's one of the things that I hope you get from this interview that I do with Chris Ortega and the FP&A guy, Paul. So definitely enjoy. But before you do, let's hear a word from our sponsors and then right into the interview.
We get it. Keeping track of your finances can seem pretty overwhelming when you're running a business. Achieving your financial goals in business should not be a guessing game. That's why it pays to work with someone that can take a hard look at your financial numbers and not add more stress to the balancing act of running your business. The T.O. Turner Group will provide a clear and concise explanation to your financial standing. The T.O. Turner Group will simplify finance and help you make smarter money decisions in your business.
Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, and you're watching the Finance and Accounting Show. And today you're going to hear from three very, very, very good thinkers in the space of finance and accounting. We're going to be talking about a topic that a lot of people ask us is, how do I make that shift from accounting into FP&A? Like, when do we make that shift? How? And even why do you make that shift? So you definitely don't want to miss today's episode, so stay tuned. So without further ado, let me bring on my guests, Paul, the FP&A guy, and Chris Ortega with Fresh FP&A. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us. I'm really excited to be here, Terrell.
Thanks you for having me too, Terrell, man. It's an honor, man. We got the dream team here right now, man.
You know what? I thought about that, like in the intro, is which photo we should go with. Should it be this one or should we go with this one?
Yes. I mean, either one of those, man, you're going to go with winners. You're going to go with gold medals, man. And I'm super humble and appreciative to be here, man, with two tremendous thought leaders in the space, man.
Same here.
Absolutely. And well, you know, one of the things that I thought about that I think was a very, very helpful for a lot of people is really thinking about like the accounting and FP&A, because I personally feel like over time it seems like it's been more of a push of the traditional accountant of working in the background, and that's what people thought about the numbers team, to where then people are like, hey, well, we need to get this person's input. And to me, it feels a lot more like FP&A. So more people are asking that question of, hey, how do I go from being a traditional accountant to FP&A? And so I want to talk about that. So Chris, we'll start with you, get your perspective. What have you kind of seen in that space, or what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, so being a person that started my career off in public accounting, I would show everybody my Ernst & Young, like branding right here, my E&Y. But I made that shift, and I knew earlier on, like I did my first 7 years of my professional career was in accounting, in public accounting, and then I was a controller at a high growth SaaS company as well. And to me, Terrell, like I was looking in that space, and I was like, I knew earlier on that I was different, right? And why I say I was different was that, you know, I was always the one asking about, well, why is this business growing 40%? And we should change our audit practices, because how can we do the same thing we did last year on a business that just grew 40%? Like, I was always so curious in my auditing role, and I just realized that like that curiosity in the business always lived in the finance side of the shop. And you know, even taking it back when I got out of school, like I was a dual major in accounting and finance, and like, yeah, I knew the accounting and stuff, and you know, I knew the business algebra of accounting, but I always loved and knew that the value add of a business is not what do we say we're going to do, but what are we going to do about it? And typically that question always got answered in the finance FP&A side. So, and the way that I did that is like, I had the accounting experience, but I was going to school to get my MBA, and I jumped into my first kind of like FP&A experience. So I was getting the book education of, you know, how to be corporate finance. My MBA was focused on it in corporate finance, international business, as well as getting that entry level experience. So for me, that was where I was like looking at it and saying, man, this is where the future is going to go. This is where my skills, passions, and talents align with. And this is where I see myself having the biggest value in an organization.
Awesome, man. I love it. You know, as you were talking, one of the things that it reminded me of, I remember I started off in public accounting too, and it reminded me of this client I was on where we had to move to, it was somewhere near a beach town. So we moved there for like 3 months. We were there working on that client, trying to fix stuff or whatever. I mean, great place to be. But one of the things that really dawned on me, because we all used to ride to work together, and we were riding to work together. And I think I remember looking out the window and I saw this boat
And it was a charter boat. And I was like, I wonder how their business model works and like, how do they make money? And talking about that, then everyone else in the car was like, well, I wonder if they have the right, documents, if we had to audit their revenue recognition. And I was like, I'm like, we're like two totally different people.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking like, how does the business work? They're thinking, how does revenue recognition work? And if they can audit it, and I'm just like, okay, all right, I might be in the wrong like specialty.
Definitely.
Funny.
So like when I left public accounting and I took my first job in corporate finance, and that's where I really started seeing something. And it was an interesting transition. So I want to get your perspective, Paul, when like you've probably seen being in finance, you've seen people who were accountants come over to finance, and there were probably things that you knew as, just standard basic knowledge that they were just learning. What have you seen on that?
Yeah, so I get probably hit up a couple times a week from somebody. How do I make that transition from accounting to FP&A? And all the people at work would come and ask me like, hey, what's FP&A like? I want to make that transition. And I think there's a couple things that are really key to me. And the first is the curiosity you both just talked about, right? You need to want to understand how the business works. If RevRec and accounting and historical and all those, the rules and guidances that come with that, if that's what you love and that's your framework, you're probably not the right person for FP&A. So first, just understanding what you enjoy. Like I worked with one guy and he was really good. I loved him in accounting and I thought he'd make a good in FP&A. And I'm like, hey, I'm looking for an analyst. And I did it for a year. Way too much gray area. I like the rules. It's not me. I'm like, all right, you keep being the controller. You're great. I love the role you're in and we partner well. So that's good. But I think that's the first thing that people have to understand is, where do I fit? What do I enjoy? And then from there, there's that natural curiosity, starting to do analytics, improving your Excel abilities, and really starting to understand the business. A great example that I love is, it will come out here in a few weeks, a guy by the name of Cameron Jenke. He's a VP here in the Valley, and I interviewed him for a episode of our show on FP&A, and he tells about his journey. He came in and he was doing SEC reporting type stuff. The company was getting ready to go public, and they had when he first started, wasn't SEC, but he was doing some reporting things, and they had no FP&A department.
Right.
And he was like, how does the business work? And so he started putting things together. And one day he heard people in the business going to accounting and asking, how do things work? Oh, that's Cameron. Go talk to him. You know who was VP of FP&A before he left that company? It was him. And he got a great start and moved up because he had that natural curiosity. He's like, there's a gap here and I'll figure it out. And I just love that approach. I was like, every accountant who wants to make that transition should listen to how he found a niche, found a need, didn't get asked and just filled it, was proactive and made it a project. And all of a sudden he became the expert.
Awesome. I love that. And I will say to everyone that's watching and listening, I mean, if you're an accountant, do understand you don't have to go to FP&A. It's not a requirement. I mean, and I do think I like what you pointed out about that. Hey, if you're not curious about the actual business, like it's okay for you not to come over because you're probably not going to like it. I mean, I guess, Chris, have you seen situations where someone has left accounting, gone to FP&A, and they just didn't like it?
Oh, 100%. Right. And I think it's what Paul talked a little bit about, right? Like that skill set, mindset, and a lot of times too, it's personality set, right? Like FP&A is so much about like the partnership side inside of the business, right? And like you may have the most technically knowledgeable person, they could have the most awesome Excel skills, but if they don't know how to work with a business, like a salesperson or a marketing person or an operations person, or they're not able to translate that complexity inside the business and communicate that effectively to a non-finance person, it doesn't matter if you have like, oh man, like I can do this awesome Excel model or I can work in this awesome tool. That collaboration element is typically where I've seen a lot of people make that stumble, is they think it's all about the awesome data visualizations and using all these great tools. But one of the most important parts of FP&A is that partnership and advising. Like that's how I view the FP&A is like the financial partner and advising aspect of it is like way more important than the planning and analysis side. Now, it's important, but to me, like when I've seen people kind of make that jump where they're, the accounting, they're doing their reconciliations and they're doing all their analysis. Now it gets for that time to say, hey, communicate this marketing spin to a marketing person and give them insights that they can understand. They are like deer in headlights. They're like, what? I got to go talk to somebody? Like, I got to go talk to a marketing person? They're super extroverted. Like, how do I go do that? So I think that collaboration, that connection aspect of it is typically where I see is like that level of communication and collaboration and connection you need to have in FP&A is sometimes it is undervalued and people think it's not as important. And it's a lot of times a failure for them actually being successful in FP&A.
I think there's a lot of truth to that because, I always tell people that when I went from, accounting to FP&A or in corporate finance, however they want to look at it, is I feel like corporate finance FP&A is where I learned how to be a human being again and actually interacting with other people.
We're glad you're a human again, Terrell.
Hey Terrell, welcome to humanity, dude. You were the first AI and ML, right? You were the first algorithm.
So accountants aren't humans, in case anyone is wondering.
and I say that because it's like I felt like for a while, like when I was strictly technical accounting, it was really look at the prior year, prior procedures, rinse, repeat the process. And I get why that was useful. It's just for me over time, I noticed like my social skills dropped because I spent so much time alone. And I was in audit. And so less time interacting with people, more time digging through data, digging through documents, trying to trace processes. But then, like you said, when you got in the FP&A, it was, all right, now, not only do you have to analyze the numbers, you got to go have a conversation with this non-finance person, and you got to give them some instructions or help them navigate the decision to improve the numbers. And that's where it's like, okay, all right, now I really have to start using all these people skills I once heard about and actually like develop them. Paul, for yourself, I mean, when you saw people, go from accounting to FP&A, did you see a lot of people kind of struggling with the soft or the interpersonal skills?
You definitely see some of that. I mean, it depends on, the individual. Obviously, some accountants pretty quickly realize they're very extroverted and they want to be in the business. So they naturally make that switch. But those that have been behind their computer the whole time, they struggle. I heard someone say, and I really loved this advice, he said the two most important things in FP&A, I think this is important for accountants, is one, learn how to communicate, right? Business partnering is about communication. And the second one he gave was ability to anticipate change. Ability to anticipate, not just change, but to anticipate, because it's all about the future. And those are really hard transitions because let's face it, accounting is almost all about the past, right? You occasionally get asked about some future things, but 90% of it is analyzing what happened and understanding that. Where FP&A, yes, you got to analyze the past, but if you don't have the ability to think into the future, you're going to really struggle. So I think some of it just depended on personality. I think a little more seasoned, a little easier transition, but I think it's definitely, I've seen them struggle making that, switch.
Gotcha. Now, both of you have mentioned, Excel and as you were talking. And so one of the things I think that I've heard some people joke about, and I was like, there's a little bit of truth in that, to where it's like you study business, you study accounting, you study finance, and then you spend so much time realizing I probably should have got a master's degree in Excel. What?
Yeah. Have you seen the chart?
What was your experience on that?
Okay, I'll tell you. This is kind of funny when you talk about that experience. Have you seen the chart where it shows, college or, elementary, you learn numbers, and high school, you learned algebra, and college, you learn calculus, and it lists all of them. And then it shows, complexity, and all the way down over here, it shows Excel, right? Which is where you do everything.
Yeah.
So, definitely what you said is true there on Excel. I mean, if you're not careful and if you're not out being that business partner, you can be caught up in Excel models all day, and you don't want that. That's not a good most FP&A professionals. You need someone who might be a data jockey and that's what they want to do. And if you have that on the team and that's where they want to be and that's what they're good at, that's fine. But you can't have a department full of those, right? You got to be able to get out behind, as you both know, you got to get out from behind your desk and go talk to people. That's really where FP&A happens.
Definitely. And I think like the Excel skill set, right? Like it's like everybody. I took I remember in college, it was called K201, and it was like the first Excel class that I took, and we were doing this, like we were doing macros, we were doing all this other stuff. And like I didn't really start learning Excel until I got into like using it to like make my job faster and easier, right? So like, and again, like it wasn't using Excel because I wanted to create the best model, and like a lot of times FP&A people fail because they create the best Excel model that they've ever seen, right? And then once you create that, now you've like limited the business's entire scope to revolve around this 27 tab document that takes 8 hours to refresh, right? And if you open it up and you get a ref error, you know you're not going to sleep that night. You've kind of pigeonholed the business. So for me, I was like, how can I make Excel amplify the ability for us to have insights and discussion, to talk about things, right? Not to make sure I wanted to create the best cash flow model or the best revenue waterfall. And I think, you got to have that acumen and that ability to be able to do it. And like, you just develop that over time by just like working on the skill sets. There's tremendous amount of like thought leaders and people, Paul being one of them, that talks about how to get the best out of Excel, not just the best out of Excel to model, the best out of Excel to lead and navigate and connect to drive actionable outcomes. That's really the holy grail of what you're trying to do. But without those Excel baseline skills, like anytime you want to know a true finance person, if they're using a Mac and they're using Mac on Excel, they're not finance people.
I'll second that one. I'm with you.
+1 on that one, Paul.
I was working before I started my firm, my last job was at a tech-based company, and everybody there was just, very enthused about, Macs. And when I came in, like I told the CFO, I was like, I was the FP&A director. And I'm like, I need I need a Windows computer. I'm like, because Excel on Mac, I don't know if I really trust it. And everybody in the company kept asking, like, why do you have a different computer? And I'm just like, well, when you see our financial models, you'll realize that it's probably not the best for a MacBook. Maybe Mac has gotten better. I just hadn't tried to go back to it.
Yeah.
It's got a little better. It's still not there.
Yeah.
And, I guess, it makes a lot of sense because one of the things that I find, when I started creating content is that, talking to people who had MacBooks and Apple products, it was great for like the visuals, the digital, the creative of creating content and material editing. Is great for those type of things. Whereas I found that, your Windows computer became like a very core, like just it is I would say it's a workhorse when it comes down to like some of your basic Microsoft products, Excel being probably the one we spend the most time with.
Yeah. And that's those platforms, man. I think like the platform conversation inside of FP&A, right? That's such a hot topic. And shout out to Paul. Paul posted this article. Make sure you go follow him at the FP&A Guy. But Paul posted this article that gave the landscape of all the platform and all the individual players in like the FP&A space, right? And it is saturated with so many different point solutions. But that's also a cool thing because, technology nerds like us, like I'm excited to see all these different, like everybody has a unique value proposition. The spectrum of get rid of your Excel versus like come to a centralized solution and literally everybody falls on that. It's such an exciting time because I think the business and the partnership and the value proposition that FP&A provided, that's why these solutions are coming up, because it's saying, hey, collaboration and connection is really important to me. So I'm going to build a solution where finance collaborates in the business, or RPA and AI and machine learning are really important to the business. So I'm going to develop an FP&A tool that's specifically focused on RPA. It has amplified the ability to be able to to find what value proposition you want to position FP&A to partner with the business. It's exciting. It's exciting.
Gotcha. And Paul, I mean, I want to talk a little bit more about, that post that you did with me, because I do think a lot of people are struggling with, hey, there's so many different new technologies and things coming out. Like, do I need to be up on the latest and the greatest, or like, how do they kind of sort it out? And you do have some people who are still like, nah, I'm just, I'm going to live the rest of my life in Excel. I mean, for yourself, I mean, getting that exposure to so many different platforms, how do you start to kind of mentally navigate the complexity of that?
It's a great question. And I get asked from people from time to time, what system should I go with? And I will never say you should go with this system or that system. The first thing is Excel's not going anywhere in the short term. We'll all be dead in the long run, so we don't have to worry about it. But, in the short term, it's not going anywhere. But we all need something more than just Excel. There comes a point in that process, we've all been there, where you're trying to build a plan in Excel, and collaboration and version control and security just isn't working. And so I think what companies have to understand is there's a few things that are key to any kind of transformation and putting technology. And the first is really thinking strategically. Where am I today? Where am I going to be in a couple of years? What are my processes? How do I manage change management? How do I make sure my house is in order? And then go out and look at the different tools based on what your needs are and pick one, right? I mean, when I did the graph, I think I came up with 81 tools, and I had, 4 or 5 people reach out to me after, hey, can I show you this tool and that tool? And right. And so I think I have a list of 85 now. No one's going to go and demo 85 tools to make a choice. But you need to know kind of where your needs are and what's out there in the market, because there's a ton of great stuff coming out. And that's why we're releasing this market guide here in a couple months, where we're looking at the 3rd generation of FP&A tools. We got, 15, I think we're down to about 15 tools or so that we'll highlight. We started with 40 something of trying to understand the space. So people, especially small businesses that want to get off Excel, but maybe don't want a big, huge tool that's kind of that multinational that has everything. They want something that's low, self-service, easy implementation, bringing that out so they can understand, because it's hard to make the choice of what tool to go with.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I like being a CFO now, just to add to what Paul said, right? Like you get that paralysis, because there are, like Paul said, 85 different options to go choose from, right? Like you get to it, you're like, you want some ice cream, you go to the ice cream store, and then you see the board and it's 85 different pieces of flavors of ice cream that you want, right? And it's like, how do you find that out? And I think, just to add to what Paul said, right, when you're going through that consideration, just know any platform and any technology adoption is going to go through 3 phases, right? It's going to go through the introduction, it's going to go through the implementation, but the most important part is going through the integration of that technology inside of your solution, right? Inside of your business, right? A lot of people do a great job. Here's the email. We just implemented technology A, right? And it's that email that goes out, and then you don't hear from it for like 8 months. And you're like, hey, did we implement some technology A? Because you haven't integrated that in the business decisions. You haven't integrated that in the communications. You haven't integrated that in the collaborations. So everybody thinking about making that platform, or whatever like flavor of ice cream you choose, make sure you're introducing it, you're implementing and integrating that inside of your decision-making process. That's how you reach really holy grail of like utilizing the tool, right?
Yeah. And, I think that's a really good point, because one of the things that I've seen, and, when I worked at, some Fortune 200 companies, and I remember there was one company, and I won't name the name, and I guess if you look on LinkedIn, you'll probably see there's a couple options, but in my work history, but you might be able to figure it out. But I will say it was one company I was at, and I came into a role. They were in the middle of changing an ERP, and there was a few things that I immediately saw that were issues. And I said, okay, all right, these are things we need to address. And I was like, hey, where's for all the processes that we want this ERP to support, like, what's the process map, or does anybody know what each of those steps in the process are? And no one could say, yeah, I know. And I'm like, that to me, that's a sign that we probably missed something
when you guys were designing the system, and like $200,000 later and several consultants ended up pulling the plug on the implementation. And I was just like, there are just too many gaps. And so one of the things that I tell people is, if you're looking at trying to find a tool, maybe the first thing you should probably do is map out your current process, like what actually happens before you start looking at a tool. Because if you don't know what you currently do, you won't know what tool really aligns with that well. So I would definitely add that for anyone who's looking at tools and trying to figure out something next.
Yeah, I would go one step further. Not only map out what the current process is, but what do you want it to be? Make sure you understand, how does it work today? What's my ideal process? And keep those things in mind as you're doing those demos. And does this tool make sense for where I'm going in the future? Right? Because generally you're adding that tool because you've been growing a lot of times, especially FP&A tools. You're going from Excel to a tool, which means you've outgrown it. So where are you going to be in 5 years? If you implement this tool, are you going to have outgrown it? So I think really understanding, not only mapping it, that's critical, but also thinking and mapping what the future is going to look like as best you can.
Facts. I mean, that's right on that, Paul. That's spot on, man.
Now, one of the things I'm curious about is, like, when you guys went into, your FP&A roles, did you imagine that, you would become a pseudo IT person because you had to be so deeply involved in these system implementations?
I think for me, yeah, like all the and I had the ability to implement ERP solutions. I've had the ability to implement, BI, AI solutions, FP&A tools, you name it. Like I think, to me, like, I've always been like a technology nerd and always loved to do that. But I think one of the key places for FP&A inside of that value proposition is translating this tool of what's in it for the business, right? Too many times, man, like, in organizations do this, marketing teams do this. Yeah, I'm throwing marketing teams in there, sales, right? You get some solution, and like the solution is to solve a people problem. Like, it's like, why did you have this? Why did you go buy this whole new tool to solve a very unique business problem, when if you took a step back to the process side, you could have looked at it and said, hey, maybe if we make some refinements on these processes, we understand the workflow, we understand what's in it for the business, we probably don't need this solution. And I see it time and time again. A lot of CFOs, VPs of finance, all different industries, whatever size you are, they go after the shiny Lamborghini in the showroom, right? That's that big ERP or like CPM tool or AI tool, right? And they're like, I need that Lamborghini. But you don't have the people that know how to drive a manual, the process of moving the gears, right? You don't have the value proposition, and you got this Lamborghini driving in the value proposition of a school zone. Like, why would you do that, right? So too many times, I think, like, it's a whole recipe, right? Don't always go to the platforms. Look at the people, look at the partnerships that you built, look at your processes, how you're going to manage high performance. Take those elements and then be able to say, okay, maybe what makes the most sense in my FP&A group, which it probably makes sense for a lot of people in FP&A groups, I need to focus on the people aspect of it right now. Like, how do we take care of our FP&A people first before we go get the Lamborghini?
But the Lamborghini's fun, Chris. Come on, you know that.
I know.
But that is a very interesting point, because I think if you don't know how to actually move the vehicle, it reminds me of this 30 for 30, I think was 30 for 30 broke, where one of the basketball players was saying he had this brand new Lamborghini in his driveway. It never moved because he didn't know how to drive a stick, but he bought it because he just thought that, hey, he had arrived, he should have it, but he never learned how to drive a stick. So it just sat there.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I think that it would be very, very helpful, I think, is, as we talked about, people, why you should not go to FP&A. So for people that are, looking at potentially going into FP&A, what are some of the good reasons why that you have seen? Because I always tell people is that, going into FP&A may have a lot of opportunities. Now, it does come with a cost. Your approach to work And maybe even your work-life balance in FP&A may be very different from what you were used to before. So what are some of the good reasons why a person should make that shift from accounting to FP&A?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a great shift to make. I think FP&A is a great place to be. And I mean, the reasons you'd make it is, one, you want to be closer to the business. You want to be able to influence the business more, and you want to see it from a different perspective. And there are people that have naturally have that curiosity, and some of them sit in accounting and some of them may be consulting or investment banking or wherever. But if you're an accountant, don't just go to FP&A because you want to get promoted, because you think, okay, I just need to advance my career. Go because you're actually curious about the business and you want to collaborate and add value in a way that may be a little more difficult in accounting. Obviously, it depends on the size of the company. We've all seen it. There's plenty of smaller companies where accounting and controller does a lot of FP&A function. And that's a great way to understand if that interests you, is that those type of roles where you're doing a little bit of a hybrid and you can decide, okay, yeah, does full FP&A make sense to me? Or should I go back somewhere else and focus 100% on that accounting? Because that's really where I belong.
Yeah, I think for me, like even at a broader high level, right? You're looking at the people shift around the great resignation that's happening, right? Finance is not sheltered away from that, right? People are standing up, and it's becoming less about the tactical and strategic skill sets they're looking to build, and more about how does my organization support my mental health and overall health? How are they involved in their community? How am I going to have a seat at the table? How am I going to have impact? How am I going to be doing impactful? And how I'm going to have an influence in what the work that I'm doing and the decisions that we're making, right? So like there's this whole shift at a macro level that I think is really influencing a lot of people to go into FP&A, because that value proposition is closely aligned with that, right? So like the value proposition of what FP&A means in a high performance and partnership organization, they're going to be collaborative. You're going to have an impact. You're going to have the ability to have a seat at the table because you're right there working with the CROs and chief marketing officers, right? You're going to be pushed in developing your skill sets. These teams are going to be open to be early adopters in RPA, AI, and machine learning, right? So I think this macro of drivers that are causing a lot of people to look at other opportunities is also very matchly well with people wanting to go into FP&A. Mm-hmm. So to me, I think like as you're evaluating that why, like why should I choose FP&A? Like it's the same consideration that you should choose of why should I go to this organization or why should I go to this industry? For me, like I've spent most of my professional career in high growth, entrepreneurial, seed, startup, scale, exit, SaaS businesses. And I love that, right? Like I found that earlier on. I was like, this is the industry. This is the space. Like when you go to a place where you're like, these are my people, this is where I'm going to be challenged the most, all those other things kind of like fall in line with that. So find what you're passionate about and what you're looking for in an organization. Then find, does that organization have those things to develop the professional skill sets that you're looking to gain?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, when it comes down to FP&A, when I made that switch, what I did not realize is the amount of opportunities that it opened up. Because when you're in FP&A, as you both said, is you're touching so many different parts of the business. And, the FP&A skill set isn't one that just gets used in the FP&A department. And I think probably my most intense FP&A experience was probably when I worked in investor relations for a Fortune 500 company, to where I call it, some days I was a ghostwriter for the CEO and the CFO. Other days I was on the phone with Wall Street analysts trying to, point out errors in their model without, crossing the line of insider trading. And, and so, I mean, it was one of those things of just, where it's like I had to have a deep knowledge of the business, had to have a deep knowledge of finance and how, models, calculations, forecasts, projections work. But I think what it did is it opened me up to so many opportunities afterwards, whether I wanted to stay in finance or even some opportunities that hey, I could have gone completely into the commercial organization and left finance. But I think it gave me the opportunity to see what else was happening in the rest of the business And it also allowed them to see that, hey, this person doesn't just have, knowledge of financial numbers. They also care about the rest of the business and stuff like that. So I think it definitely has a lot of great opportunities. Now, one of the other things that people ask is, hey, at what point in my career would it be good to make that switch from accounting to FP&A? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I'll let you go first, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead. So for me, it's like I made that shift pretty early because I realized like accounting wasn't where I wanted to go and where I wanted to be, right? So like leaving public accounting, even being in a high growth startup company, being like the controller there, I was just like, man, this whole like all of my conversations were built on like what we talked about the previous month. And I'm like, I don't even want to talk about that. Like, let's get to this new conversation. So I think for me, it's not when you feel like you're stagnant and you feel like your skills, passions, and talents are not being amplified. Like, I think being comfortable in any stage of your career is like the worst. When you're comfortable, that is like, if you're not growing and changing, learning, develop, and shaping yourself, if you're not doing that, you're literally going the other way. Like, you're detracting yourself. So I think like there's no like, hey, get like 6 years of experience or make it to a manager, in public accounting and get your CPA. I don't think there's really like a set definitive time frame that you can set on it. It's really about, hey, like I've grown and matured. And even the thing about it is like your career is going to go through stages, right? Like I went from being an individual contributor, I went from being a manager, then I went to being like a director, then I went to being like the top person, the VP of finance, the fractional CFO in the organization. So as your career even goes through those transitions, right? Like you make those shifts and find out what's important. There's also life comes in the way, right? Like you may have a family, priorities change, and you're like, look, I did FP&A a little bit, but this is like the wild, wild west. I got to go into something. So I just think it's always knowing what stage in life, your personal life and your professional life, where that transition makes sense. And it's going to build, it's going to make you grow. It's going to expand your comfort zone and you're going to grow and thrive. I think that should be the catalyst of making that decision to jump to FP&A.
Absolutely. Anything you want to add on that one, Paul?
I mean, the only thing I would add is I agree with what Chris said is I think sometimes you do need to get, a baseline of experience. And that may be if you're an audit, you need to stay in a little while, even if unless you want to make a total career change, but if you're thinking I want to be an FP&A, usually giving it a certain amount of time, just because one, employers expect that, two, it shows you're willing to stick with something and there's usually something to learn. So I don't know that there's a set time for anyone. You obviously got to follow your passions, but also giving a role enough to kind of understand and prepare yourself for the next stage. I think if you're looking to go into FP&A, you're just starting your career, I think getting some baseline knowledge, probably a couple of years in there and understanding how it works is really valuable. Sometimes it may not make sense. You're like, no, this isn't for me. But, employers want to see typically some kind of background that they're comfortable with and some level of experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, one of the things that I definitely want to do is I want people to know, where can they find you guys online? So let's start with you, Paul. Where can they find you online? And hey, what can they expect when they check out more of your content?
Sure. So, LinkedIn is probably the first and best place to find me. And I go by as Chris had mentioned earlier, the hashtag, the FP&A Guy. So I also have the website, the FP&AGuy.com. You can go there and sign up for my newsletter. And so, you'll see it there on the screen, but that's the best place to follow me. And then as far as content, I talk about tools quite a bit. I talk about FP&A. I'll talk about Excel. So those are really the areas to talk about business partnering. Try to mix it up, but it's pretty much all things FP&A.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend everybody, man. Paul is a tremendous, not just local, global thought leader. Every day I look at his posts and I always take something and learn from it. So I would highly recommend all the listeners check him out on everything and make sure you follow him for sure.
Absolutely. And then Chris, where can they find you, man?
Yeah, so for me, I'm similar. I'm on there it is right there. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also check out my website, freshfpa.com. And really what I focus on is, the finance, FP&A, CFO, startup, scale up, entrepreneurial kind of scale in any kind of organization, really cater to business and financial transformation on a global scale. So happy to help and support, and I'm passionate. And I just want to say, man, super humble and appreciative to be on this and share this time with two tremendous people that I look up to. Terrell, you're an absolute monster, man, in everything that you're doing. And Paul, salute to you for everything that you're doing to help lead the value proposition of FP&A. There's some other great people out there as well, you know, that are doing great things, man, but very humble, very appreciative, man, to share this time with both of y'all.
Absolutely. And you know, we hope that this has been very helpful for a lot of people, because as you can see, is there are no cut and dry answers to when to make the shift, how to make the shift. I mean, a lot of it really does align with your experience in FP&A. I mean, in FP&A, there's a lot of gray area. I mean, making that decision about the switch, it's a lot of gray area, but we hope that this provided some perspective. And definitely, Paul and Chris, thank you guys so much for coming on, man.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, guys.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Finance and Accounting Show. If you like what you heard, don't be selfish. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and then share this with a friend, because you know a business owner that could definitely use this insight. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on the notification bell so you get all the updates when we release a new episode.